The conference room lights always had a way of bleaching the life out of people. You could walk in confident, prepared, certain of your work, and leave looking like a flat, overexposed version of yourself. Maybe that's why the moment felt unreal. Like I'd stepped into someone else's story instead of my own. My father sat at the head of the long glass table. Shoulders rigid, cheeks flushed with the kind of frustration that always showed up when my sister was upset. She sat beside him, her posture loose. Her expression carefully arranged, offended enough to win sympathy, but soft enough to look innocent. It was an expression she'd practiced her entire life. My slide deck was frozen behind me. A wall of unfinished sentences and graphs. The room smelled faintly of burnt coffee and old carpet shampoo. Someone's pen stopped mid-stroke. Then my father said the words that cut everything open. "You're suspended until you apologize to your sister." Not a conversation, not a discussion, not even a warning, a verdict. My sister tilted her head, revealing the small smirk she thought I couldn't see. The same smirk she'd worn every time she realized she'd won long before the game began. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I didn't list every fact or timeline or responsibility I'd carried for the last 5 years. I just said, softly, all right? If my father had known what those 2 words would unleash in the company, in our family, in me, he would have swallowed them whole. But of course, he didn't know. He never knew. I grew up in a house where silence didn't mean peace. It meant hierarchy. Loudness belonged to the important. Quiet belonged to the responsible. My sister learned the rules early. Cry once, and the world paused for her. I learned another rule. Stay calm. Stay reasonable. Hey, you'll be expected to solve problems you didn't create. Reasonable became my job description. Long before it became my prison, I still remember the day my acceptance letter arrived. A thick envelope, dense with possibility. My name printed neatly across the front. I stood in the kitchen and tore it open with trembling hands. The words, "We are pleased to offer you admission," glowed on the page like my future finally had a doorway. My father read the first line, nodded once, and placed it beside a coupon booklet as if it were mail addressed to the wrong person. 10 minutes later, my sister walked in with an engagement ring, and suddenly the house filled with champagne flutes, laughter, and camera flashes. My letter slipped beneath a pile of party napkins before the night was over. That was the first time I understood a hard truth in my family. Spectacle always outweighed substance. After my mother died, the imbalance sharpened. She had been the only person who noticed when I stayed up too late, or when my shoulders were tight with stress, or when I swallowed my emotions to avoid causing trouble. When she was gone, the house tilted even further toward my sister's orbit. Then came the family business, the place where every unspoken rule in our home finally became policy. My sister excelled at promising impossible things. I excelled at fixing the consequences. She made timelines that should have taken 12 weeks in 4. She approved budgets that didn't account for testing, burnout, or infrastructure. She took credit for wins she didn't understand and blamed me. For losses she caused, my dad backed her every time. "She knows the clients. You handle the rest," he'd say. Handle the rest. An entire department, an entire pipeline, an entire structure built on the invisible assumption that I would hold everything together without complaint. And for years, I did, one silent sacrifice at a time. But standing in that conference room, suspended for pointing out facts my sister didn't want to hear, something inside me finally snapped into clarity. Not anger, not grief, not fear, something quieter, something sharper, something like a door closing from the inside. "All right," I repeated, not as surrender, but as a beginning they mistook for obedience, a beginning they were never meant to see coming. Asterisk. The hallway outside the conference room felt colder than usual, not because of the air conditioning, but because of how quickly people stepped away from me. No one wanted to be associated with the person my father had just publicly reprimanded. Eyes glanced up, then darted away. Voices hushed. Doors closed a little too quickly. People weren't avoiding me out of judgment. They were avoiding the discomfort of witnessing unfairness they couldn't challenge. When I reached my office floor, I froze. A new organization chart was taped beside the elevator. My sister's name sat at the top of a structure I had built. Her title, bold. Mine, missing entirely. Not an oversight. A rewrite. My phone buzzed. Are you okay? Do we still follow your timeline? There's a lot being said upstairs. I flipped the phone over, let it vibrate into silence. Then my father called. He didn't ask how I felt. He didn't acknowledge the injustice. He didn't recognize the years. I'd held the entire development branch together. He simply said what he always said. Just keep the peace. Family comes first. Family, the word had become a weight, heavy, familiar, and hollow. When the call ended, my sister was already in the doorway of my office. She didn't knock. She never had. You can end this right now, she said, her voice soft enough to sound gracious. Just apologize. She straightened her blouse, checked her reflection in my dark monitor, and adjusted a stray hair. I watched her. Then I felt it, that quiet internal shift again. A click. A lock sliding into place, not fury. Not pain. Just finality. I closed my laptop, picked up my portfolio, and stood. That's it, she asked. I nodded. All right, her smirk faltered, just for a second. I closed the door to my office with a soft click. A small sound. A massive boundary inside. The room felt eerily still, as if everything inside it already knew I wouldn't be returning. I pulled my hair back with a steady hand and opened the top drawer. Then I began first the documents files. I'd curated, protected, and updated for years. Risk assessments, project scopes, budget worksheets, notes from meetings no one remembered I'd attended. Then my degrees wrapped in tissue paper. Then the awards, quiet proof of things my father had never acknowledged, but the company had no choice but to recognize. 2 hours passed in complete focus. The same focus I'd used to rescue every impossible project my sister had ever promised. Then came the final step. I opened a blank document and typed. Resignation letter short, precise, emotionless. Once printed, I began assembling the real plan, the one I'd been preparing unconsciously for years. I compiled every project timeline, every miscommunication, every contract note, every unrealistic promise my sister had made, evidence, not accusation. Facts, not commentary. When the file was complete, it didn't look like revenge. It looked like a mirror. A mirror the company had never been forced to face. I clicked send. Board members, department heads, key clients. Subject line, project documentation and status overview. No emotion, no warning, just truth. Within 60 seconds, my phone lit up nonstop. Legal executive. Clients I didn't answer. I finished packing, closed the portfolio, and placed my hand on the desk one last time. A silent acknowledgment of the years I'd given freely. Then I walked out. The hallway felt different now. Not colder, just irrelevant. By the time I reached the elevator, I'd already accepted a meeting with a recruiter, a position I'd once declined out of loyalty. Loyalty that had been weaponized against me. I left the building without looking back. The city air hit me like a reset button, sharp, clear. Honest in a way my family never was. For the first time in my adult life, I felt the absence of pressure, the absence of expectation, the absence of being the one who always fixed everything at home. The quiet didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. I fed my dog, poured myself a glass of water, and stood in the stillness of a life that no longer demanded sacrifice to prove worth. I slept deeply, dreamless, untaped, untreat. In the morning, I got dressed without rushing, without needing to carry an invisible weight on my shoulders. The world outside looked almost unfamiliar, as if I were seeing it for the first time through eyes that belonged to me, not them. When I arrived at the office the next morning, the lobby buzzed with low whispers. People stepped aside as I walked by, but differently this time, not out of discomfort. Out of anticipation, the air held the charged quiet of a system. Moments away from rupturing, my father's assistant waited near the executive elevator. Hands trembling around a folder. He wants to see you? But we both knew the request wasn't really his. The situation had shifted overnight and he was no longer in control of the narrative. I didn't answer. I headed straight for the conference room. The door was already open. Inside, my father stood at the far end. Eyes red, jaw clenched. The company lawyer sat nearby, pale and uneasy. A paralegal typed rapidly, capturing everything. My sister hovered by the window, arms crossed tight enough to crack bone. The room felt swollen with tension, like everyone had finally realized what silence could cost them. I took my seat without acknowledging anyone. My father tried to begin. "We can fix this," he said. "Let's be rational." I set the portfolio on the table. "I'm here to finalize my resignation." The lawyer inhaled sharply. My sister's face drained of color. My father blinked in disbelief. "You don't have to do this," he insisted. I opened the folder, pulled out the resignation letter, and placed it gently on the table. "It's already done." My sister stepped forward. "This is ridiculous." I slid another folder across the table. "It's a documentation, contract notes, miscommunication logs. Technical warnings," she ignored. "Budgets," she rewrote. Emails she sent without understanding their consequences. "Facts." The lawyer opened it, and his expression collapsed. "This is substantial," he whispered. My sister leaned in, scanning each page with rising panic. "You can't send this to clients." "I already did," said calmly. My father's voice cracked. "You blindsided us." "No," I replied. "I revealed what you ignored." The lawyer cleared his throat. "Legally, she's within her rights. Nothing violates confidentiality," my sister snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "So she gets to walk away after destroying everything." "I didn't destroy anything," I said. "I stopped carrying what wasn't mine." My father stepped toward me. "We need you for the Hamilton account. We can't deliver what your sister promised." He realized his mistake too late. My sister swung toward him. "You're blaming me?" He didn't answer, because the truth finally had a voice, and for once, it wasn't hers. I stood, lifted the portfolio, and said, "This isn't my problem anymore. I've already accepted another position." The lawyer nodded, confirmation, not support. My sister's mouth fell open. "Who would hire you after this?" The lawyer answered before I did. "Anyone who values competence." For a moment, the room was silent, cavernous, breathless, complete. I walked to the door. My father reached out as if to stop me, but lowered his hand halfway, the reach of a man realizing he'd lost something he never knew he depended on. "We can still fix this," he whispered. I met his eyes. I already left. I walked out, past the panic, past the shock, past the building that had swallowed years of my life without ever acknowledging the cost. Outside, the air felt brighter than it had any right to be. Lighter, warmer, like freedom carried its own temperature at home. I set my portfolio on the table. Nothing dramatic, nothing destructive, just done. The quiet didn't swallow me. It settled around me like a room finally taking shape. The next day, I walked into my new company, bright, open, filled with people who didn't know my family name and didn't care who my sister was. People who greeted me without comparison. People who asked what I could do, not what I could fix. As I stood by their windows overlooking a skyline that didn't expect sacrifice from me, I felt something shift again, but this time, it wasn't a closing dot, it was an opening. A doorway I had stepped through with nothing but truth, restraint, and the willingness to stop rescuing people who confuse my competence with obligation. For the first time in years, silence didn't feel like erasure, it felt like freedom. And I understood something simple, steady and life-altering. Silence isn't surrender. Silence is a doorway to a life that finally belongs to you. If you've ever stood in a room where your worth was treated like background noise, let this story remind you, you don't need their permission to walk away. And when you finally do, you don't lose yourself. You return to yourself.